Episode 6. Trauma and healing.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, well, Greg, I've been, kind of watching you on Facebook, and and then of course, I saw of what you were doing with the Doctors Without Borders, and it's just, I don't know, it's huge to be in your presence.
It's not such a commanding presence.
No, but it's just like, wow, I can't believe I made friends with someone who's, just doing such great work. It's big.
Thank
for
you.
me.
Yeah, I mean, let's go ahead and introduce our guest. Greg, tell me if I'm butchering your name. Kavarnos?
Very good.
That was good. Excellent.
Perfect.
I love that. Welcome to the press. You've kind of been here since the inception. I gotta say, I agree with Susanna on this about being excited, not just excited to meet you, but there's I was talking to someone recently in my organizings where we were talking about shifting the paradigm around the classism of celebrity by celebrating each other to such degree that we bypass that with our very associations to each other. You know what I mean? And I've been doing that, and I noticed that now I end up getting starstruck around people that I'm connected to. I'm like, oh my God. So I totally fucking get it. I'm like, it's fucking Greg. Oh shit. I fucking got to get my shit together because what you do is pretty fucking badass. Instead of stepping on what you do, would you be down breaking down for everybody what it is that you do in your life that you've been focusing on? And that, specifically, that focus is on the topic which we chose for today, which is the title of this podcast is Trauma and Healing in the Age of Anarchy.
Okay. So, I don't know if you could call it chance, but I happen to live on the island of Lesbos since about 1996. It's a small island in the northeastern Aegean, and it's right off the coast of Turkey. Yeah, like if I look out my window now, I can actually see the coast of Turkey. Because of its proximity to Turkey, it means it's become one of the main crossing points for refugees escaping from their countries via Turkey into Europe, right? So, this is the second time that I've been involved in working with refugees. The first time I was involved was around about 2007, where we had large numbers of Afghan refugees escaping the American invasion, basically. And then, then the situation sort of calmed down for a while, and then in 2015, with the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, with the war in Syria, the refugee issue came to the forefront again. Yeah, with just unbelievable quantities of people. Unbelievable quantities. Lesbos is a small island, right? Mm-hmm. So it has about a total population of about 60 to 70,000 people. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And in September or October of 2015, we were seeing about 2,000 to 3,000 people arriving a day.
Jesus. From
Turkey, right? So at some point in time, the refugee population on the island was larger than the actual local population. Wow. Yeah. So, in the beginning, I was sort of reticent to start working in the field of with the refugees again because of my experiences the first time around. But I got to, I mean, you couldn't not get involved. Yeah.
Right.
Everybody in the town of Mytilene, which is the capital of Lesbos, is involved in one way or another, even if it's just commercially,
Right.
just selling things to people,
Right.
or renting properties or
Right.
cars or whatever. So the past 5 years, I've been working with Doctors Without Borders. I just have to clarify that anything I'm going to say today is not the position of Doctors Without Borders.
Understood.
Right?
Understood. This is a space that is completely illegitimate of certification, completely illegitimate of qualification. We make no judgments of each other here.
Okay. I make that clear because, I mean, even though a lot of my experience, the past 5 years I've been working with this particular organization, but I've gone through a number of different organizations before sort of settling down with Doctors Without Borders. And a lot of the time when I speak out, I'm just talking about my experience. Right. I mean, when you're an employee, how much you are part of the organization and how much the organization is just using you.
Yep.
It's, even with NGOs, you see this happening. Yeah.
Yep.
So anything that I'm going to say today is going to be my opinion.
Understood, 100%.
Not the organization's opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just saying that a lot of the experience over the past 5 years, at least, has come from my work in the organization as a psychologist working with victims of torture, victims of violence and sexual violence, victims of war.
Jesus.
Yeah. It's been, it's not easy working in this field. It's not easy because there's a lot of obstacles to the work which come from the political situation, the social situation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm called upon to help people overcome their torture experiences or their war experiences, while at the same time, because of the government's policies towards refugees, they're constantly being traumatized by their experiences in the camps that they're living as well. Yeah, I've even had patients of mine that have been murdered in the camps here. So it's a handful trying to work with all this stuff. Yeah,
lots of trauma, like tremendous amounts of trauma. How do you keep yourself grounded when you're surrounded by the amount and not just the amount, but the severity of the trauma that you experience and the people that you're serving? How do you keep yourself cohesive? Because I would imagine that that's incredibly difficult, right?
Yeah, it's difficult. I'm probably one of the longest running staff members in the organization that I'm working for currently, here on the island.
Right.
And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm a local as well, because there's, I have the support, I wouldn't say of the community, because the community's really turned against refugees and people working in non-government organizations.
That's a worldwide sentiment. Yeah, that's happening all over the place. And that was something I wanted to bring up. It's like you're finding yourself existing at the fulcrum of a conversation that people are expressing a lot of pretty vehement opinions and strong opinions about that they have absolutely no connection to.
Yeah.
At all.
I don't make excuses for the behavior which is starting to manifest in the community over the past year and a half or 2 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I can understand that people are starting to sort of reach some sort of limit in their ability to cope with what's been happening.
Right.
Because, it's been a long time, right? It's been since 2014. So we're in the 7th year now, basically. And like I said, I mean, there's a lot of benefits, economic benefits, especially for the community from the presence of the refugees here. I mean, when the camp, I mean, the refugees are currently living in a newer camp now because the previous camp, they burnt it down, right?
Wow.
So what happened? Yeah.
Now, when you say they, you mean the people living there or outside?
Yeah, the people.
They were just fuck this camp, we're burning it down?
Yeah, basically. Well, basically what happened was with the COVID, they were put on lockdown, and then they started to see that the COVID restrictions were starting to be relaxed for the locals.
But not them.
But not for them, yeah. So they had to keep living in this, I mean, the camp itself was designed for 3,500 people, right? And at its peak, there were about 25,000 people living there. So what you had was basically the refugee camp was the second largest city on the island.
Jesus.
So, and you had this city of 25,000 people with 5 policemen having to police this whole thing, right?
No pressure.
At any particular point in time. So, of course, there were gangs, there was prostitution, anything that happens in any other community, you were having happen in this particular community as well. But, the people that were living in this community, I mean, there were people ranging from, there were Syrians. I mean, and the Syrians are not just one single set because within Kurdish people, yeah? And then you had, and they are Sunni Muslims, right? And then you had the Afghans, and they are Shiite Muslims. And then you had Central Africans, and most of them were Christians. And so you had this huge mix of people with all these incredibly traumatic experiences coming from these countries that had really serious problems. And then you just dump them all together in this ghetto, basically. And then you just put a fence around this thing, right? And then at some point in time, with the COVID restrictions, people just got more and more and more frustrated. And it's sort of what sparked the riot and the burning of the camp was that they built a COVID center for, how do you say, sorry, my English is starting to slip. So they built a center for COVID in the center of this ghetto.
Quarantine?
Yeah? A quarantine center. And people they said, what the fuck, So they just started to burn things. And they just burnt and burnt and burnt and burnt.
Wow.
Like it just went for 3 days. In 3 days, they'd completely leveled the camp. There was nothing left.
Jesus.
And then suddenly you had 25,000 people living on the streets of the main town, right? Homeless. So this is why I'm saying I'm not making excuses for the local population. I mean, I didn't turn into a racist because of this, right? But I can understand how somebody who was already sort of leaning in that direction would suddenly react to this in a really negative manner. Yeah. Plus you had a number of local politicians feeding on this racism for political profit.
Right. Sounds familiar.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So it just kept building up and building up. And then the other thing that happened, then the locals rioted at some point in time as well because the central government in Athens wanted to build a new centre here on the island, a closed centre for refugees. The locals were saying, as were the refugees, that no, we don't want a new centre. What we want, and everybody, what the refugees wanted, what the locals wanted was for the refugees to be able to leave, right? So the central government from Athens sent in 6 or 7 squads of riot police. and water cannons and everything, and just tried to push it through like this, yeah?
Just to
People
be clear about something.
Yeah.
When you said everybody wanted the refugees to leave, are you talking about
including the refugees?
Including the refugees.
Yes, of course. Because
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
On the island.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
They're trapped on the island. Most refugees don't want to be here. They don't want to be on the island. They want to be either on the mainland in Athens, in the capital, yeah, or they want to continue their journey into the Central and Northern Europe, especially Germany and places like this, right?
They want to travel and find home or find home.
Exactly.
That's really the root of it.
Stability.
Yes, of course. And also, there's already, at the beginning in 2014, all the borders were open. So as the people were arriving on Lesbos, they were getting a piece of paper in 3 days.
Wow.
You know, they were just getting their identification paper. They were getting on a boat. They were going to Athens, and then they were traveling by foot through northern Macedonia.
Jesus. What's that climate like that they're traveling on foot? What's the area?
Well, luckily, this was in summertime.
Okay.
So it was okay, yeah. And then at the end of summer of 2015, they closed the borders with northern Macedonia. And actually, the country, not Greece, Greece didn't close its borders. The other countries, Germany, Austria, Hungary, northern Macedonia, all these countries closed their borders, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was working I went up to work in northern Greece with another medical organization at this point in time, up on the border with northern Macedonia, where because people still kept arriving because they could still leave the island, and they just kept building up and building up. And at some point in time, you had just this shanty town of maybe 30, 40,000 refugees. The Northern Macedonian government had put a fence and put armoured cars and soldiers on the other side of the fence, and everybody was just blocked there. Yeah.
Now, this was for COVID restrictions?
No, this is in 2015.
This is 15, okay.
Yeah, this is before COVID had even hit the news.
Right,
yeah?
so this is people closing down borders specifically because of an inability for some reason, either through desire or capacity, to allow for the movement of the people that had been traumatized and displaced.
Yep, exactly.
So COVID hadn't even entered the picture yet, and that's where we're at. Shit.
I know we saw 4 years of this happening before COVID hit, correct?
Mm-hmm. COVID's been past about 1.5 to 2 years. And before that, the other thing that happened in the meantime, there was a deal made between Turkey and the European Union for Turkey to police its borders more strictly, to restrict the flow of people coming from Turkey into the EU. And along with that, they also trapped the people on specific islands and a couple of specific locations on the mainland, on the borders between Greece and Turkey. So people just, whereas in, say, 2014, 2015, they were here for 3 days, they got their papers and then they travelled.
Mm-hmm.
People then started to get trapped for a year, 2 years, waiting for some sort of decision on their applications. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just restrictions on top of restrictions on top of restrictions. Yeah.
So in a way, you're talking about over time a calcification focused on borders.
Yeah.
Calcification meaning like a restriction of movement, right? Things are crystallized.
Yes.
And you haven't even gotten into COVID yet.
No.
So just like considering things, it seems like there's like a curve that's expressing, like a logarithmic curve, that as soon as COVID hits, it takes what's already calcifying and just exponentially increases the pressure.
Yeah.
And
the government, sorry, go on.
That's all I had to say. Please go on. I just wanted to say, that's a trend, right? That's a trend.
Yeah, it's a trend. It just gets more, everything becomes more and more and more restrictive over time.
Right.
And the government just used COVID just as an excuse for more restrictions.
Exactly.
Yeah?
And it's fucked up because that's a time where restrictions are legitimate considerations, right?
Exactly.
So the allowance for ideology to slide underneath that is so fucking historically tactical. Like it's, yeah, I just want to point that out and step away and allow you to continue.
No, you're correct. You're very correct. I mean, and it doesn't help lend legitimacy to the health issues or to the health problems that exist because of the COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Because it undermines any attempt to try and actually put something in place which is in place not just for the means of having some sort of authoritarian control, but actually for health reasons.
Exactly.
Yeah?
And they conflate. I mean, we're seeing that in America big time right now around just a massive amounts of conflict around something as simple as wearing a mask. Like, like that tiny little ritual of consideration is so charged with political conflict. It's kind of mind blowing. And to take that into perspective, that like that's a conflict that's happening with like pretty extreme veracity in America, which is also a pool of data generation that's creating actual tactical fuel to the political ideologies which are affecting the people who are taking much larger considerations around being restricted and have actually much more practical information to offer around being restricted and health. And it's such an inverse communication loop, right? Like the people who are experiencing the actual experience are the quietest voices in terms of who's taken seriously in terms of actual practical outcomes, right? And I can't help but think that like as I'm listening to aspects of the story, while they're very different and conflating any historical or geographic thing with another it's not a one-on-one metric. Seeing similarities and patterns of restriction and how restriction can be a complex set of restrictions, right? Even like it doesn't have to be just a giant gate on a fucking door. It can be tiny decision-making assumptions which build up over time, right? I can't help but see certain parallels in how I've experienced in witnessing homelessness in the cities I've witnessed in America. And like I said, the scope and the causality, it's not one for one. I don't want to dismiss or diminish the very real differences in terms of tactical analysis, but the immediate separation of the homeless and the homed, you know, and the conflict of those without homes and those with homes that exists right now on the planet has similarities across this conversation. And what you're talking about is like one of the most worldwide focused aspects of that, right? Like, and I'm very invested in building bridges. So what I want to do is I just want to say that like, we don't have to diminish any aspect of this conversation to say that while this conversation is located in these specific places, this is still a worldwide conversation, you know, and that's kind of where the second half of this podcast, would hope it would go is to show the work that you do. Right. And the work that others like you in this worldwide conversation of meeting these restrictions, these patterns, and the trauma they create with actual human interaction and direct action in as many dimensions as possible to create something else that's not those things, that alleviates the pressures that we're seeing that cause the trauma, heals the trauma, and allows for different human emergence to take the space. Right. So since you've given us a broad picture, because I know there's so many hyper focuses that are super critical that you could go into around all the details without diminishing any of that happening, can we flip the conversation and talk about what healing looks like in the middle of all this? Because in the worldwide conversation that is evolved around this, there's going to be people that feel powerless and are powerless in some ways. And if our goal is to empower that, right, that's going to look like so many different things for so many different people. There's so many different tactics that we can share, that given the fact that right now in history we can talk to each other at such speeds across the planet, we might actually be able to help each other across the planet, you know? So in terms of healing, what are some of the things that you have found, and maybe this is related to being grounded, like where do you find healing in the midst of meeting all of this trauma on a regular basis that's so monumental and overwhelming?
I would have to say there's a trend now. I mean, up until recently, we've always classified these people as victims, right? And now we're starting to talk more about talking about this group of people as survivors. Now, it might seem like it might seem like splitting hairs, yeah. But I think, from my experience, when I have a person across from me who's had these really horrendous experiences, right? And like mind-bogglingly horrendous experiences. Like I couldn't even begin to think what it would be like to go through these things, right? What I see though is I see somebody that has survived these things, right? Like a lot of the time I say to my patients, if I was in your situation, if I had to go through what you went through, I'm not sure that I would be here in front of you right now, right? And I don't consider myself.
Hold on, everybody. Pause. Stop me for a moment.
Okay.
No worries.
So, I mean, I don't consider myself a weak person, right? I mean, I'm a martial arts teacher. You know, I know how to fight. I know how to do this. I know how to do that. I've been in fights in my life, you know, whatever, right? But when I see what these people have gone through, it just, I think for me, I gain from this experience as well. It's not just a matter of being worn down by my contact with these people. Actually, I gain a lot, right? I mean, one thing I definitely gain is that it makes you feel that that your life is actually not as bad as you think it is.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that.
So that's the first thing. You go, well, actually, I've got a lot of things to be thankful for, right? It also teaches you how precarious things are. Because, like, for example, I remember having one patient, and he was filthily rich in Syria. He had a steel factory. So he had a lot of money, right? And he used to use a lot of his money also to help the people in his community. He had like 12 kids and blah, 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 blah. And then he just lost it sort of overnight, right? And he left everything behind. I mean, okay, he managed to get his kids out and his wife. And it was him, his kids, his wife, and everything else that he had, all this material wealth that he had, his houses, his factories, this and that, gone. Just gone in a second, right? So this starts, the thing that teaches me also is to start to focus less on material circumstances and to look a lot more at relationships, yeah? Like personal relationships, and see the value in a personal relationship. Again, though, I mean, this is difficult. I mean, you try to put it into practice, but you always fall into these habits. So I pick up this being thankful for what I have, placing more importance on personal relationships than on material satisfaction. Yeah,
Exactly.
really appreciating the strength that people have, and people that under other circumstances, if you were to see them, you go, oh, I don't know this guy. He doesn't look like he punches his way through a wet paper bag or something stupid like this. Yeah, and instead of like, and then suddenly you find out that, you know, they spent 3 years in an underground prison cell being tortured and have come out of this, okay, fucked up,
Yeah.
but still relatively sane considering what they'd gone through. So you start to appreciate the people's capacity for survival as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I mean, the question was, you know, what do I do to be grounded, to be able to put up with it? Well, actually, my patients are the ones that ground me because they show me the reality, yeah? And, I mean, the reality beyond just all the sort of external material conditions of having nice clothes and, you know, having a nice car or something like, and a nice house to live in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's actually, I mean, it's not easy having to listen to these really horrific stories. Okay, and it triggers things inside of you from your own personal experiences as well. But it actually gives as much as it takes. Weirdly enough.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can relate. My experience in just what I call service, because it looks like a lot of different things, you know. That's what it comes down to for me is service. It's like going to the gym, you know. It's like it's going to leave me incredibly tired and it's going to leave me aching and stretched, right? And it's going to leave me energized. And I'm going to be grateful I did it. And I'm going to do it again the next day. I'm going to keep doing it. And the results of my very body will show me the power of a human body and how it can just shape to almost anything it wants to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I get that and I feel that and I love it. That's how I look at it, right? It's just service. And the cool thing is that's accessible for everybody. It really is.
Yeah.
Like anybody, doesn't matter where you are, you can do that for something. And you can hit that feedback loop, you know? And here's the thing, though, is that people weaponize that. This is what I'm running into a lot. People weaponize that to sidestep the conversations that are critical around that, around empathy and compassion, right? Mm-hmm. And because I've heard people frame compassion as the creation of space to lessen people's suffering, right? And when we talk about splitting hairs, when I was first presented with that information from someone, I was like, yeah, it doesn't feel right to me, because to me, compassion is the collective experience of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
It's what we do after that is what our actions from compassion. But compassion
Mm-hmm.
isn't about creating a cool party to feel really good instead of suffering,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's about suffering, period. It doesn't mean like the creation of suffering. It means being in the suffering and adapting from that, right? And I think that's where like privilege insulation is so dangerous. When you get
Mm-hmm.
entire populations of Americans that are like, don't have any idea how to relate to what's going on with these larger patterns, and they project it on their smaller patterns in their life. And they create this torrent of information that just feeds the very processes of conflict that are the thing that they're actually complaining about in the first place. You know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, it's no mystery to, I think, everybody here that this is an anarchist podcast, right? Like all of us have met in anarchist circles discussing anarchist practices and approaches and sharing each other's experiences around anarchy. And so I just kind of wanted to put that out as a thought consideration for you all, is it safe to say And where would this create conflict in the conversation of anarchy? That a fundamental aspect of anarchy that's not moralized, it's just a fundamental organizational tactical acknowledgement, is mutual aid, right? And so part of that mutual aid is going to inherently have to be and include, it's going to have to include the skills and capacities and talents of empathy and compassion, right? Like, would you say that's like a primary anarchist fundament?
Yeah. You can, I mean, the reality is, I mean, that the working for non-government organizations can be a career path, and it can be a career path that actually can give you quite a bit of money, right? So NGOs run into the same limitations as any other sort of corporations or organizations or businesses under capitalism. Yeah? Because, okay, I mean, I get a wage for what I do, right? Now, some of that wage I put back into my work, not through the organization, but just personally. Like if I have a patient and they don't have shoes and I can't find shoes for them through another non-government organization, I'll just go buy them a fucking pair of shoes, right? I'm not going to die of starvation if I do it, right?
Right.
But I'm still coming from a place of privilege, though, because I still have the capacity to do that because I'm in a position of privilege, because I'm the one, in the host country, because I'm the one that it's employed. I mean, NGOs, some NGOs, I mean, there's some I won't talk in acronyms. There are some non-government organizations that work on anarchist principles. One of those organizations is No Borders, for example, right? And Food Not Bombs, for example, is another organization. But I think the problem with the societies that we live in, or the problem with the society that we live in, because we all basically live under capitalism, is that anything you do becomes part of the system. Yeah. Like it's almost impossible. I mean, there are certain points where you can sort of jump in and sort of break out of the system, or at least fall between, you know, the interlocking sort of chain or this barrier, which is the system. Yeah, but there's this in the 80s. There was the English band Chumbawamba. Anarchist punk band, right? And in the 80s, the big thing was the starvation in Central Africa. And then there was this whole Band-Aid thing where all these big names in the musical industry got together and sang songs all together to make money to give to help with the starvation which was happening in the Central Africa. And so Chumbawamba put out an album called "Pictures of Starving Children Make Millions of Dollars," right? And I think I mean what and then I was thinking about this. I love the fucking band, right? And I was thinking that pictures of fleeing refugees make millions of dollars for NGOs, for non-government organizations, just like pictures of starving children back then made millions of dollars for people in the music industry. So non-government organizations are an industry. Right. Yep. So the question is, but how can you be effective outside of the industry? Like in the beginning, there were a lot of organizations here that were volunteer organizations. And what I would do is, outside of my working hours, I would give time or money to these different volunteer organizations, which I knew were not doing it just for the cash.
Yeah.
They're all gone, right? They're all gone. I'm still stuck here. I'm stuck here. This is where I live, right? 7 years on, I've seen all sorts of organizations come through, anarchist organizations, Christian organizations, you name it, yeah? But the only ones that managed to stick it out were the ones that were making some money from the situation. So the thing is, I mean, and a lot of the time, and you've seen me argue with people a lot of the time, like the basis of revolution is community. And the basis of any sort of relevant action is community. If you don't have community, you can't do shit, right?
All you can do is authority. That's all you can do is authority. That's the only other option. If you're not doing community, what is it? It's authority.
So, I mean, there's, I don't know, man. I always, I mean, it's come to the point, I don't know if I wouldn't say that I've become cynical, right? I still, I mean, you know, I started off thinking about anarchism and anarchy when I was like 16, 17 years old, right? And now I'm 52. I still believe that anarchism and anarchist systems and anarchy is the correct way to run a society. I haven't outgrown this, yeah?
Right. Right. Agreed. Same. No plans to anytime soon.
You're just more wise. That's all, and know more how to make anarchy work. You know, better than when we did when we were 17 or.
Because you've done it. You've been doing it. Still doing it.
Still doing it.
That's why having you on here is such a gift and a blessing. You know, like I'm all about connecting things, man. Interconnection. That's how our brains work. It's how systems work. Is they informed through interconnection. And
I think, yeah. Sorry.
I mean, riff off that, please.
I mean, because for me, I think we got to get away from this idea of ideological purity. Right?
Yeah.
We got to get out of this sort of fundamentalist thinking that something is only anarchist if it's like this and this and this, right?
Right.
And you're like, welcome to the real world. Here's the real world. Okay? Compromise. Got to do something. Can't wait for the revolution. Where's the community? I don't fucking see it anywhere. I mean, okay, you get some people, they throw some ideas at each other and blah, 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 blah. But I don't see anything. I mean, when I think about anarchist community, right, I think about what's happening in Kurdistan, right? Now, that is a real example of anarchist community.
Want to break that down for our audience real quick, just in case people haven't been aware of it?
Not aware of what's happening in Kurdistan.
Like, what are you doing then?
I mean,
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I mean, I first traveled to the Turkish part of Kurdistan. I mean, Kurdistan was broken up between 3 or 4 major countries. Yeah, it was broken up between Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran. They just carved it into little pieces, yeah, and said, right, this one's now, it's not Kurdistan anymore. It's Iran now. It's Syria now. It's this now. It's that now, right? So I traveled into the Turkish part of Kurdistan in the mid-90s, and this is when the PKK was like at its peak. You know, Öcalan hadn't been captured yet, so you know it was still, you know, they were rocking in Turkey. Yeah, Turkey had come out of the military dictatorship as well, so it was loosening up to an extent politically. But like, you know, once you crossed halfway across Turkey, got past Ankara, you could see that you were now in a military state.
Right.
Right? So there's that part of it. Then there's the part of Kurdistan, which is in northern in northern Iraq. The part of which is in northern Iraq, of course, is more conservative. It's it's more nationalistic. It's definitely worked hard for its autonomy and it's gaining it. Yeah, but it's a different sort of model. Then you have the part where Kobani and Rojava and all these towns are in northern Syria, right? Now, what happened was the PKK was a Stalinist party. And then at one point in time, they captured Öcalan thanks to the Greek government, right? The Greek government gave Öcalan to the Turkish authorities, yeah? And what happened was Öcalan, and he's still in jail since 1998 or 99, I don't remember. He started reading Bookchin. And then he had a realization and he saw the light. And so he changed. What he saw was that this idea of the Kurdish nation state was just being used by imperialist powers like America and Russia and stuff like that. And they were weaponizing the Kurdish people in order to cause instability in the Middle East.
Right.
And he saw this very clearly with what was happening in northern Iraq, where the Peshmerga government is basically funded by the Americans. So he said, no nation state. Throw the national shit out, right?
Excellent.
Turned it into council communism, like the ideals. And there was this, then the civil war started in Syria, and the Kurdish people in Syria took up this idea and actually set up self-governing towns and provinces and fought wars against ISIS, and they fought against the Syrian government and beat them. They were the first ones to make ISIS actually lose and begin to retreat, and are currently fighting a war against Turkey. Turkey is using its borders with northern Syria to make attacks. It's basically invading northern Syria, Turkey, and it's using ex-ISIS militia alongside its regular Turkish military forces. And yet, even though when all this started, I thought, that's it. They're finished. They're not going to be able to survive this. And yet, they're still surviving.
Right.
And yet, they're still running on a model of self-governance.
Right.
And yet, they're still working outside of the model of the state. So it can happen, right? It can be done. It quite clearly can be done. What I would want to know more is what was it caused the Kurdish people in the region to bind around this idea? Yeah, because it's easy to bind around the idea of a nation state because we see it everywhere.
Right.
Yeah, it's just the way that shit happens. Yeah?
It's a brand.
Exactly, and it sells really well. So what caused the people in these regions to bind around this idea? I mean, the Kurdish people have been fighting for like self-determination for a really long time now, yeah? But ideologically, they just flipped. They just flipped from a statist, like a Stalinist, Maoist model. They just flipped into an anarchist and council communist model.
They vibrate so close together. It's really just the authoritarianism that's ingrained in people that I think causes that little quivering needle to bounce one way or the other. It's like at some point when someone gets up enough in that conversation, they're going to go, you know what? I'm either going with the established power or I'm going with this other thing that is a completely different feeling of approaching this entire thing. And I think there's a leap that happens there. Sometimes people are pushed into that leap. Some people push themselves into that leap. But that seems to be a pattern. You see it in America with how we're watching, at least I'm seeing, sure others are, the rise of the self-identification of fascism, right? Not just sublimated fascism, not just some Umberto Eco multiple points kind of creating it in a gestalt, but like actual identified, you know what, I think that fascism is the way to go. You know,
we had that here in Greece. I mean, we're still on the tail end of that. We had the neo-Nazi Golden Dawn Party in Parliament, right? And it was only after the murder of the anarchist hip hop artist Killer P that sorry, it's not. You can hear something like guns going off. It's not guns.
Noted.
So it was only
like
after. Yeah, it's Easter, and this is how they this is how they celebrate the resurrection. At 12 o'clock, they let off fireworks.
Explosions for Jesus, huh?
Explosions for Jesus. So after the murder of the hip hop artist Killer P, and because the neo-Nazis were actually taking a lot of the political supporters of the Conservative Party, which is in power now, it was drawing them away from the Conservative Party, so they saw that they were losing votes. That's when the Conservative Party decided, okay, well, now they've killed a Greek person. Up until now, they were just killing migrants.
Right.
We got to do something. And they used that to criminalize Golden Dawn Party and put them all in jail after about 5-year trial, right? So we saw that, like, people just just went straight towards Nazism. I mean, it was Nazism. It wasn't even fashion. There was nothing soft about it. It was Sieg Heils. It was fucking swastikas. It was the whole fucking thing, right?
Just straight into that. No.
Straight into it. Yeah, straight
the double
into
down.
Yep.
And you know, you saw like the neo-Nazis working in tandem with the riot police against the protesters that were protesting against the austerity measures that were trying to be brought in and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of almost sounds like the Proud Boys.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Same pattern, different architectural makeup because of the power structures and the patterns and the historical patterns of those power structures.
It's also because, I mean, Greece is not, it's not a multicultural nation. Well, it is, but it's not a colonial nation like America is. Right. Yeah?
Right.
So fascism has been around. I mean, the first fascist dictatorship in Greece was the Metaxas dictatorship, which was in 1936. So that came around the same time as Mussolini and our favorite Austrian and all of those, right? So fascism there's nothing new here in Greece. And then we had the military dictatorship, which was a nationalist dictatorship from 64 to 72, 73, if I remember correctly. So in a reaction against that, you know, socialism became really sort of trendy. But then socialism brought us to austerity. It brought us to the recession. It brought us to all these different things. So again, the pendulum swung in the other direction. Right. And people said, oh, let's try Nazism again.
Oh my God. I mean, it's gotta be some kind of emotional catharsis for those folks, right? That's the only thing I can imagine. Like at some point, someone has to be like, this is what I really feel good about, you know, is like destroying a whole bunch of people. You know,
it's easy. You just go, they're to blame. And then that's it. You don't have to think at all. Yeah. It's like, who's to blame? The migrants are to blame. What the fuck? How the fuck are migrants to blame? The migrants have only been here for 5 years, you know?
Exactly. Like, what did they do?
They tipped the balance of their existence in their proximity to us and our blame to them. You know, all our problems were them before. They were just farther away. Now they're closer. So that belief is amplified even more and just projected on the patterns at hand.
I think also that. Yeah, go on, Susanna. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, it's almost like, oh no, they're coming to enrich our culture. Quickly, let's demonize them while we're at it. You know what I mean? It's kind of what it feels like.
Mandatory square dancing for everybody.
I think, I mean, the other thing is the way that the government uses it is like, if you're not a good boy, you're going to end up like them.
Right.
Yep.
Right? And everybody's like, holy shit. Let's get behind these guys because I don't want to end up like them, right?
Exactly.
I mean, and we saw the collapse of the middle class during the recession here.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of really fucking pissed off people after this, and they were all looking for someone to blame. And we had, in the meantime, we had the left wing government of Syriza, which just applied all the austerity measures anyway. So you had the right wingers were applying the austerity measures with glee and happiness and riot police, and then you had the left wing applying the austerity measures, going, "Oh, we don't really want to do this, but we're going to screw you anyway."
This is for all of our own.
Just like,
yep, yeah, it's like a softer, quieter blow of screwing you over. I mean, it's always the right wing. They're right up front about it. You go to the, I guess you could call it the left, side, where they're just like, yeah, we're just going to soften the blow, and then that's it. Then these people are still caught. I mean, there's nothing helping these people. They're just still caught in between that two-party stuff.
I mean, there is a large, quite strong anarchist movement in Greece, right?
Yeah.
And it tends to be centered around the inner city suburb of Exarchia, which had a lot of sort of self-organized centers and cafes and bars and stuff like that, right? And they've been fighting hard, and not only against the police, but also against organized criminals trying to make inroads into the area, through the sale of drugs and stuff like that. So there's something that's building there. There's something happening there. But my problem is, and this is the problem that I've had, ever since I got into anarchism as a theory, is that it tends to be reduced to a lifestyle.
Yeah.
You listen to a particular type of music, you wear a particular type of clothing, and when I think about the roots of anarchism, if you think about something like the International Workers of the World, the Wobblies, or if you think about what happened in Spain, or you think about what happened in the Ukraine and all these historical situations where anarchism actually, or you think about what's happening now in Kurdistan, you can see that it's not a lifestyle thing. And the arguments that I get into a lot of the time is that with the more Sex Pistols oriented anarchists, right, is that
the fashion anarchists.
Yeah, the poser type anarchists, if you don't make links with the community, and the community includes the Mr. Middle Class with his wife and child, and you're never going to have a political movement which is going to actually be capable of making any real change. It's always going to be really small, really limited, and really easy to be confined and destroyed once it gets just a little bit too far out of control. So, for example, at some point in time when the Nazis were running around doing graffiti all over the city and stuff like that, I said, look, guys, I reckon we should go rent high pressure water, like a machine, it's one of these, and detergent and stuff like that. We should go clean up the Nazi graffiti around the town, because A, you're stopping the spread of their propaganda, and B, you're showing to the community that you are actually capable of giving something to the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people looked at me like I was a fucking idiot.
What are you talking about, Greg? I have plans this Friday. Me and my friends have been planning our fun little party for months now. I think I have time to go rent a power washer. I got kids. What are you talking about? I'm gonna go listen to the Sex Pistols just to get over this nonsense.
I just wish I'm at a point where I'm like, please, someone like join me or someone help me, like, let's get together. And that's like where my, Greg, you're absolutely right. It's all about community, and we need to show them, we're not, like, especially here in the US, we have a reputation for being rioters and burning stuff down and stuff. But, like this summer when we had like the George Floyd protests, a lot of us went out and cleaned up, graffiti and stuff like that, especially from the right end. And it just seems like here, I feel like at some point, some American anarchists are just very apathetic. So,
I mean, the other thing that I used to talk, this idea, I was in Australia, right, when back in my youth, in the anarchist movement in Australia, and everyone was going, smash the state, smash the state. I'm like, look, dickhead, the state in Australia provides you with education, the hospitals, the roads, everything, right? I mean, because there was quite a strong welfare state in Australia as well. And it was actually doing, like, at some point in time, I was liaising in my work as a social worker. I was liaising with the LGBT unit of the police force in Australia, in Melbourne, right? So they had things like this, right? So I said, I was going to my friends.
I just so I can clarify, though, when you say the LGBT wing, are you talking about the police force that was specialized specifically to interface with LGBT people, or is it like a special squad?
No, this
police, or was it
what
both?
you said? What you said. There was a special group which was for liaising and working with the LGBT community to, Okay, so and then I'd go back to my friends and say, look, when you go out and you say smash the state, you've got to be a little bit clearer about what you're saying to people, because you're just fucking, when you have a state that's functioning and it's functioning well, to say smash the state, it's just counterintuitive. When you say smash the state, everybody's going to look at you and goes, what's this fucking idiot saying, right? The state's giving me everything right now.
Like, please tell us exactly what you mean. Do you want free education? Do you want, free healthcare? What is it?
Yeah, exactly. But it's given me free education, it's given me free healthcare, and it's given me unemployment benefits, and it's allowed, so what does it mean, to say smash the state under that circumstance? Now, if you have an incredibly repressive state, like we have now, for example, in Greece, right? And, like the state's response to anything here in Greece is to send in the riot police. It's like, COVID, send in the riot police. This, send in the riot police, crackheads. Yeah, this is the way to do everything. Then it makes sense to talk about smashing the state.
Absolutely.
Then you say, look, this is the state is the source of oppression. It's the source of violence. It's the source of this. It's the source of that, right? What does it mean to say smash the state in America, where, you have like Republicans saying, yeah, we want to get rid of the state. Then you give the view to people outside looking at this, what you're saying, that actually the anarchists and those fucking lunatics over there are saying the same thing. They're both talking about reducing the state. I mean, what has the reduction in the state meant to me as a citizen? It means I can't get free healthcare. It means there's a lockdown, but I'm not getting any sort of bonus to be able to keep my family alive. So, like I said, we've got to get out of this sort of ideological purity thing, And especially we've got to get out of this just using catchphrases.
NLP. NLP, neuro linguistic programming. that's literally, I didn't make this shit up. I'm just reporting, right? So NLP is the term created, and it has a wild, long history that I don't want to delve too long into, but it's basically the packaging of the perception of anarchist self-service metabolized as a product to teach people to actualize themselves in a capitalistic environment.
Right. Okay.
Right. So it's all catchphrases, right? Oh, I'm not a failure at life. Because I have a vision and I can make the best business that my vision is ever, you know what I mean? There's no question about whether the business is relevant or not to the vision. It's all packaged. It's the same tools of like self-perception that can be used by anybody for anything, right? You throw up enough catchphrases in the right direction, you're going to get Nazis. You throw up enough catchphrases in the right directions, and you're going to get an underground culture of people exchanging resources, right? A black market or a black culture. You throw up enough catchphrases. Point is, it's all branding, right? And so when you say we got to get out of these catchphrases, the critical truth of that exists in the paradigm right now where we live in the age of illusion, right? Like it's a lot, there's just orders of magnitude more information for almost any individual to consider around any number of things far outside what we've ever experienced before. So I see this in a lot of just inherent, and that when I say reactionary, I don't mean that as a pejorative. I mean it as like a mechanical inherent function of a person being exposed to new information, specifically information that challenges preconceived notions and assumptions, right? So when you talk about getting away from these catchphrases, I get excited, but it's kind of one of those, this is kind of reflective of the conversation we've been having. It's like, well, if you say smash the language, what are you replacing it with? What are we losing with the language or not, right? And that's where I'm excited to have conversations around, how code switching is important in our desire to build bridges across many different thresholds of code manipulation and interpretation. Right? And by code, I don't even mean digital code. I mean just like language like code. The periodic patterns of information that are changed by other periodic patterns of information and impact. Like we have the power to use language to generate power and organization, right?
I think if there's one thing that we really have to underline as anarchists, and to underline it continuously, and to make it probably the focus of an anarchist ideology, is this, and bringing it back to what you said originally, is the concept of mutual aid.
Yeah.
Right? Because mutual aid destroys immediately the idea of exchange. Right? And this is why I always, and you've seen me have arguments with anarchists that believe in market systems and stuff like that.
I hear you.
Because like as soon as you set up a market, and I've yet to see an anarchist like that believes in market exchange actually answer the question, what happens when I don't have resources to trade, right?
I've heard the answer. They go, go get resources. Simple as that.
Okay. I get killed. I get killed that, and I get the resources. Yeah. So this I think, but mutual aid gets you out of this straight away, right? Because when you have mutual aid, there's no sense of exchange. And that's really, really important, because in capitalism, exchange is everything, right? When you have mutual aid, the idea of profit also goes out the window as well, right?
Yeah.
So and also when you talk about mutual aid, the idea of the state is also unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need the state.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a market to have mutual aid, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you need is to have individuals that are willing to assist each other.
Yeah.
And that's where like going back to this idea of compassion that you were talking about. I think the basis of mutual aid is compassion, because it's an understanding of other people's needs.
Right.
So,
I'm sorry, Tyler, please.
Hi, Greg. I didn't, so I just wanted to return a little bit to you were talking about smashing the state, and then you described certain functions that people benefit from, like school, education, hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I wanted to, bring in the idea of the state versus community organizations. Like, so if when I think of the state, I think of the Montevideo Convention of Statehood in 1933, which says a state is defined as one territory with defined population, a permanent population, a defined territory, a government, the capacity to enter into relationships with other states. And I like to add in having a monopoly on legitimate use of force or violence. So this is what I think of when I think of a state that I want to quote unquote smash. But as you said, like, I don't like this idea that means every government function is necessarily evil. Like, so that's why I like to think of these things outside of the state, like community organizations, like hospitals that are all communally owned, so I guess I haven't run into too many people that I've actually heard say smash the state. I hear that sometimes in like pop culture.
Well, I've said it a couple times in my youth.
No, I've only heard it like, honestly, I've only heard it on like TV where there's like, these pop punk people like, yeah, smash the state. Like,
I'll say smash the state. I still do, and I stand by it.
Oh,
and I can break it down for what that means to me. First and foremost is that it means I smash the state in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And I smash the part of me that prescribes any affixed notion of fairness that steps me out of the presence of compassion and service, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, no matter how we organize, people are going to hurt. They're going to get hurt. And they're going to hurt each other for all kinds of different reasons. And from a harm reductive standpoint, and if someone who's invested in service as a pattern, I know that there is no utopia that's going to take that out of my personal governance, right? Like, people are going to fall
you can't rely on people to be great to each other.
I mean, yeah, conflict's going to happen. It's inevitable. But our human nature, which is to learn and adapt, can meet. At this point in my life, I'm convinced literally anything,
Yeah.
So I have like great hope and faith in that personally.
Yeah.
That smashing the state, starting with the self, starting with the idea of like what I think the state is that I've assumed must be true, at least challenging that within oneself,
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I definitely agree with that. For me, like, my big thing that I consider smashing the state has basically been the concept or Maslow theory or hierarchy of needs. Basically, once you get people to the level where, they have all their basic needs set aside, they're not going to need a state to protect them. They're not going to need someone to negotiate on behalf because they have their needs taken care of and they are more stable. And as a result, they're not desperate to to make money in any way possible, whether that's joining a gang or anything really. Like, you know, that's when you start to see more criminal activity or violent activity, is when people are not, you know, they don't have their basic needs met and they don't have a way to get them. So they have to turn to less legitimate ways of it. So I when I think of smashing the state, I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
As a template, you mean? Like
because I hear a lot of people saying, oh, let's just, you know, destroy the government. And then it's like, all right, then what? Have a big power vacuum? Like, you know, I mean, we saw that in Syria. I mean, we didn't see like the government completely collapse, but we saw basically a failed state where all these insurgent groups came out of nowhere and wanted to seize the power. You know, it's like, that's what happens when a state falls without any like organization below.
Yeah, in my travels in Eastern Europe, I mean, I saw this very clearly. For example, in Bulgaria, when the state collapsed there after they moved out of the communist system, the mafia were the ones that filled the power void and took over, because they were the next most organized group in the country. And to this day, they're still, I mean, now they're more legitimate, in terms of government. It's the same people.
It's the same structures, really.
Yeah.
You know, just it's the hierarchy of force. And the control of the environment through that hierarchy of force. It's just repeated. You know, I was talking to Suzanne about this earlier. Like, we're working on making an NGO. And I was like, we need to acknowledge as anarchists that we're creating a little state. Like, it's all just states within states. It's all these arbitrary hierarchies within arbitrary hierarchies, right? And so I want to dovetail this back to let you continue. Like, we can see what we've been talking about reflected in exactly what Tyler just brought out. That's going to happen in a power vacuum as that relates to, it comes right down to physical force, comes down to guns, right? That's the MO of the overriding macro architecture of organization right now, right? Is you can idealize it all you want, but it's who's got the guns and who's pointing them at who, right? And go ahead, please.
I mean, I think like in situations, again, I'm going to have to come back to this idea of community, right? Because like there's always going to be a small group that has the monopoly on power, right? But the application of this power, whether they'll be able to apply it and be seen as a legitimate sort of locus of power, is going to depend on the community's view of this group. So, like for example, I would talk about, say, when the Nazis invaded Greece, right? I mean, they didn't have the support of the local community. They had support of small groups of people within the community, but because the community was against them for a lot of really obvious reasons, and the community supported the communist liberation movement, which was happening here, and even with much less organisations, without the same type of weapons, without access to heavy weaponry and stuff like that, they still managed to beat the Nazis, right? So while I think that, I mean, Mao said the power grows from the barrel of the gun, Political power grows from the barrel of the gun. For an authoritarian, this is like, if you want to set up an authoritarian society, yes, it does. But the thing is, what's the rest of the community going to do? Are they going to resist it? Or are they going to go with it?
That's the other side of the conversation. The point I was making out to dovetail off of what Tyler was speaking on was, I think, it's acknowledging that these hierarchical structures, it doesn't matter the intent. If it follows the same pattern that leads to authority by the gun, that's going to it's going to bring about predictable problems, right?
But that comes back to what you said about when you said that smashing the state for you meant to smash the state that's in your mind, yeah?
Right.
It's like the situation is quote about killing the cop that lives inside you, yeah? If that's what you have in your mind, if all you know are authoritarian power structures and a centralized state structure and representative democracy and stuff like that, it's really it's hard for you to see something outside of that. And then once your world starts to crumble around you, like it did in countries like Syria, Syria, a little bit different, but like when we talk about political power crumbling, not being broken, like in Eastern Europe and stuff like that. Once the power structure started crumbling, people actually were just grasping because nobody wants to leave. I mean, it might be uncomfortable where you're at, but at least you know where you're at. Yeah. And this is what you've been using. This is what you've been brought up in, and this is what you've seen all your life, and blah 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 blah. And then to suddenly have this disappear, it's actually really, really difficult. Yeah, you just grasp whatever's around you, like in order to find some sense of stability. And if that sense of stability comes from some sort of authoritarian group taking power, like for example, I can give you a clear example in Bulgaria, right? So after the state collapsed, because there was no police and the army personnel were selling off their weapons and stuff like that because they didn't have money for food, right? So it became really normal to steal cars. Yeah. You stole a car, you sold it, you made some money, blah, 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 blah. The best insurance company in Bulgaria was the insurance company that was set up by the mafia. Because if you stole a car that was insured by the company that was owned by the mafia, it meant, number one, they found the fucking car. And number two, you ended up dead in a ditch somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, if I have a car and I want to make sure that nobody steals it, I will go and I will give my money to the mafia to make sure that I have my car. Insurance. I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to think about the ideology and the moral imperative. I'm just trying to survive here.
Right.
So when I went to Bulgaria in '96, which is the second time that their currency completely collapsed. It completely collapsed, their currency, right? There were exchange sort of booths all over the place because any Bulgarian that had gone through the first currency collapse had invested all their money in buying foreign currency. And every day they would go and they would change $5 because they knew that today they're going to change it. It was going to be 20,000 Bulgarian dollars. Tomorrow they're going to change. It's going to be 30,000 Bulgarian dollars. Yeah.
You got to lock that into a foreign currency while you can.
Exactly. But people weren't looking for alternative forms of organization and stuff like that. They were too busy surviving. Yeah. And this is why again and again and again and again, I say community because if you don't have something existing already, once everything else starts to collapse around you, you're not going to have any support anywhere. You're not going to be able to, I'm going to set up community now because the state is falling too fucking late, man.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. You're not going to too late. And so again, like I always underline community. This is the basis. If you don't have this basis, you can't even push for a change within the system, let alone push for a change that's going to cause a rupture in the system so that, like anarchism can flower from this. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see a lot of millenarianism in left-wing politics. Millenarianism. So like this idea that there'll be an end of time.
Oh, yeah.
Then after that, it's going to be heaven on earth.
Right. Yeah, that's big. That's baked into the culture big time. It expresses across multiple social and economic dimensions of very complex, cognitively dissonant justifications. It's all religion. It's all fucking religion. And in America, the actual religion doesn't change. All the shit inside of it is constantly metabolizing and adapting to maintain this overarching kyriarchal religion. That's, exactly what you just described. It's quite depressing.
But you see this, like I said, I mean, I have friends that are really well educated, leftists, blah, blah, blah. And yet, they're always talking about, when the ecological fucking meltdown occurs, then everything's going to, it's like, no, man, this is no different to religious millenarianism. Mm-hmm. Yeah? Mm-hmm. It's no different. Actually, one difference would be that at least religious millenarians set up communities that work towards this. To work towards this goal, right?
They definitely
We're not even doing this. We're just waiting. Any minute now, the state will collapse and we'll have anarchism. No, we're not going to have fucking anarchism, like you said. Yeah. We're not going to have anarchism. Why? Because there's going to be no basis for anarchism. And the basis for anarchism has to be now, has to start now. Not now, it has to start 30 years ago, 50 years ago. But now it's good enough. Let's start now.
There is a window. Just to be practically analytical, there's a window right now where just the capacity to learn has increased across the planet. So that's new. And I think we would be wise to honor that, right? Because when people are coming into this conversation, they're jumping into a gigantic river of trauma that if a person doesn't have the calibrations to meet that, they could blow any number of circuits. And when they do that, that can result in outbursts in any number of ways that can cause harm to oneself or others, right? So just the practical application of this is that I think it's important to have compassion for people that are new to this conversation and are just struggling to comprehend the scales that are being talked about that are so removed from their immediate everyday experiences and yet shoved in their faces through like thousands and thousands of different filters, including their own right now. Right. So there's a window opening right now, but it's actually more like a ton of shit is aligning. Right. And part of that alignment is directly related to the amount of trauma that is becoming metabolized by the planet just through awareness. Right. Even the opposite energy, the deniers, right, are still filling the conversation with energy, even in their desire to negate the conversations that we're trying to have. That overload of information and access to the human populace is going to hit a point where, based on the trauma, just human beings all around the planet will adapt, because that's what we do, and go, these are the conversations around these core methodologies that we can all communicate to do literally around the world. And that's going to look different all over the world. But the capacity that you, Greg, could take all your lived experience right now, and we can facilitate just dumping that into some random person's living room across any point in the planet. That's the kind of power we have right now. And that's the kind of questions that people who are new to this conversation can start asking themselves. What do I think the state is? What do I want? Why am I afraid of it or not? What do I cling to? What do I not? What is community to me? What has it meant to me? All those really important questions. We have this capacity now to process information where we can churn through that on a huge level real fast. You saw that with the Arab Spring, right? That's a direct example of how digital interconnection, which we have access to right now, massively shaped. And that conversation has spiraled for years since then. And so I just wanted to bring that into the conversation in the spirit of compassion. Because, and so two new people that are in this conversation who are perhaps close to blowing a circuit or not, like if you're new to this conversation, you haven't probably felt real suffering yet from an empathic consideration. If you're stepping into the idea of community on a large scale that involves patterns around the world, and you think you hurt now, wait till you consider what that is times 1 billion, right? And that pain is directly related to how alone you are not. And that is the critical intersection that's happening right now with this window, is there's a lot of people that are realizing they're not alone, and they're all speaking different languages, even if they speak the same native tongue too, right? So that's the challenge, right? That's the joy I have in even like being grateful to have you guys here to even talk about this and just be overwhelmed by the amount of experience you bring, is that this conversation can bring tools that can unlock these patterns to create new creativity, right? And we talked about this in the podcast earlier, diversity of tactics, right? If you're a purist, what you're saying is that there are some tactics I'm not willing to employ for my goal, right? So if someone enters this conversation and they're new and they have some of that ideological purity in them, understanding that they're going to be operating from something that seems reasonable to them. Yeah. And if they're hitting a gigantic shit wave of trauma and just getting just buffeted by it, they're going to hold on, as you said, Greg, to whatever is familiar, right? So that's a bridge right there. That's a bridge in time that we kind of have to share as community, is that like it's a constant conversation of the meaning of trauma and taking that trauma and collectively and individually putting all of our efforts into healing it, because it's worth it, because it's fundamentally worth it, because the more trauma that we heal and the more trauma that we cease to maintain, it just blossoms all the way up, right? That's anarchy. It's the order within the chaos that is fundamentally overwhelming for an individual to perceive, right? So I give thanks to even be here with y'all speaking. Just wanted to say that. We're coming up on 2 hours now. It's how's everybody feeling? You want to rock on some more topics, or feel like maybe wrapping it up?
I mean, if we do continue, we could always split up into 2 parts. I don't know how many people want to sit down for 3 hours all at once. And
I've enjoyed it from time to time, especially with podcasts that are long form that I like. Yeah, I'll just play it. I'll play the 3-hour podcast over like several days, just listening and listening.
well, I just wanted to make a point about them. I've been seeing a lot of individualists, egoists, etc., anti-civ people in the anarchy community, and the one thing that I can't seem to get across to them, the reason why I believe so strongly in community networks, even if they're decentralized, broken down into their smallest pieces, they are necessary. People are not, like, having individualism is not going to work, because if we're going to assume that we're not going to enter a utopian society, which I think is fair to assume, no one, we're not going to enter this point where there's no conflict at all. So now you have to ask yourself, if you have a strong network of people who have all their necessities taken care of, are they going to be willing to risk their own lives, pick up a gun to fight for another person? This is the point that I really want people to understand, is that when everyone has everything taken care of, when the community is there, all right, it doesn't matter if one person rises up and is a dick. There's always going to be that guy or woman or whatever. But are people going to stand up with that person when they have no incentive to do so? So that's why we really need a strong mutual aid network to make sure that people don't have the incentive to join an authoritarian regime. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we just keep circling back to mutual aid and community. It's just like I had mentioned, for me, that is the revolution, because once we create that foundation, it goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mutual aid, compassion, anarchy in the age of illusion. Word.
Sounds like the next podcast.
Maybe. I gotta tell you, it's just like doing this podcast is cool. The way we're planning on doing it, as far as it's playing out, as I can see, is we're gonna record all the episodes and then organize it into a season 1 release, right?
Okay.
Because basically that's, as far as I can tell, how we're gonna make looking like we're figuring this out as we go look like slick. Oh yeah, no, we meant to put all
professional.
Professional. Yeah, we totally meant to put these all out as a package deal. We're not overwhelmed by doing this at all. Like,
we're not, just winging it or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Talking shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I'm just really loving this process. This is, I don't know. I could keep talking if you guys want to, but I just wanted to, this just came up to me as an inspiration. Talking about ideological purity, the person who helped me understand, he dropped like a little link of logic, like plink into my little matrix that helped me understand what ableism is on a macro level. So I was like, that's it. That fucking, it makes sense. Was an anarcho-capitalist. Can you believe it?
Did you shoot him afterwards?
No, actually, we've been connected since, because he calls himself an anarcho-capitalist, but he just consistently understands and expands with veracity and like onus the principles that we're talking about. But he calls himself an anarcho-capitalist, so I'm like,
yeah. What are his ANCAP solutions to ableism?
I don't think he has ANCAP solutions. I think he's just like, yeah, we got to do mutual aid so we're all stable so we can make badass businesses. I think that's his core thing. He's like, it's not about making, he's completely just goes under the whole argument of, well, you got to pull yourself up with your bootstraps. It's like, no, we need healthy communities. And yeah, these people are being racist. And yeah, these people are being this and yada, yada, yada. But you got to still do something about that. What are you going to do about it? And he's like, we got to do this so we can stabilize capitalism. I think is his whole thing, right? But
how are you going to have mutual aid if all the property is owned by a few people?
That's not a conversation I'm even interested in having.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that.
Right, because there's no lack of access to that conversation. What's interesting about that conversation is someone who has specifically positioned themselves in a place that seems ideologically opposite, that is tactically and analytically like the same.
Yeah.
And it blows me the fuck away. It was the first time I was like, I need to look at myself and try to figure out what I'm already making up that may be based in validity, yet also may be missing something that I also need to learn about, right? Like, for instance, making an NGO. I hate it. I don't like doing it at all. I don't want to do it. But I'm doing it because it's an existing pattern that tactics can be applied to in a diversity of tactics. Am I going to stop doing my own mutual aid? Hell no. Am I going to stop doing my own community organizing? Hell no. In fact, my goal in making this NGO that Tyler and Suzanne and I are working on is largely to hack the distinction and just create a vessel of safety to try and channel the various forms of very dynamic anarchist community organizing that are all trying to work together. You know what I mean? And I hope that more people do this. I hope there's I'm forced to do this in a market where I have to perceive competition, which is a fucked up thing. When I'm not, the goal is to encourage cooperation. So like talking to an ANCAP who's like right on the cusp of that conversation is weird, right? It's just really fucking weird. And then I've since met other people that I'm like, oh, I don't want to talk to you. This is where you exist. And then they'll express things that I'm like, okay, you still exist in that place, but why the fuck are you talking about what you're talking about with such emotional investment? That doesn't fit. It's actually contradictory to what you're claiming you are. So, but I don't want to be like, stop talking about building community, right? Mm-hmm. You're not allowed to talk about building community because you're this other position, right? Especially when the dynamics and the complexities of it are usually so contextual that their position becomes very reasonable based on what they have around them, right? So it's complicated, and that's where bridge building can get really dangerous in the age of conflict that we live in, you know? And
I mean, one thing, for example, you know, community building. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to I'll give you another example of how the neo-Nazis used community building here in Greece in order to gain popular support, right? So what they were doing in the middle of the recession was to offer material support, food, clothing and stuff like that, only to the Greek people that were suffering in the society, right? Now, the motivation behind that, obviously, was to draw people towards their organisation, to get support for their organisation, also to put across this picture that they're not just out to kill people, but they have this sort of social program which will benefit members of society and stuff like this. Mm-hmm. Now, the funny thing is during the Nazi occupation of Greece, one of the key recruiting strategies of the National Liberation Movement, which was a communist movement, it was a Stalinist movement, was exactly this. It was setting up soup kitchens, giving food, helping widows whose husbands had been killed during the occupation and stuff like that. So the strategy itself, I mean, with some strategies, you can divorce them from the ideology. Yeah? Yeah. You can't, because like you've got Nazis using the same strategy and you have, communists using the same strategy against Nazis. It's identical strategy. Food, not bombs. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's providing material support to needy people in the community. But the motivation for doing it is different in each case. Yeah? Right. So obviously, I mean, you can learn things from anybody. Yeah? You can, and like one of the things that I would do is I would stick it to my Stalinist friends. I go, look what the Nazis are doing. Look, they're helping people. You guys, you're just fucking talking about helping people and the economic oppression and blah, 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 blah. And they're using the same strategy that your people used 60, 70 years ago. So why aren't you doing it now? So, no, I mean, this is, again, it's going back to this idea of ideological purity. It's like, cleaning graffiti is middle-class bourgeois. And it's playing to the sensibilities of housewives. Right. It's like, it is, but diversity you also need housewives in the movement. You can't just have fucking vegan, undernourished vegan punk rockers. Yeah. and expect to set up an anarchist society based on that. You can't. Either anarchism is inclusive of all people, or it's just
something else.
It's not anarchism, yeah?
Yeah, and it misses out on finding anarchists that may come off more as a, more normal or conservative, I guess, but actual anarchists, different points in their lives. But like you said, it's not just this group of people doing this particular thing. It's going It needs to be inclusive. So.
No, it needs to be inclusive, definitely.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you fall, and this is something that I did when I was younger, yeah? And I'm still guilty of it now, I'd have to say, once in a while. But you also fall into this feeling that you're somehow superior to somebody else because of what you're thinking and what they're thinking. Oh, look at you. It's the classic thing that you get from the libertarians, right? Oh, you're all sheeple.
Yeah.
We're free.
We're the
we know
enlightened
what's
ones.
happening. You don't understand what's happening. But you see anarchists falling into this all the time, yeah?
Yeah, and you know that's interconnected to ableism. And that's connected to ableist language like idiot, retard, stupid, all that shit. It's all aspects of that ingrained hierarchical perception. You know, that's why, like, I mean, I'm going to keep quietly speaking from the back of the room. Like, ableist language is like one of the most accessible forms of revolutionary change that anybody can make, other than taking a nap whenever the fuck you want. Like, in terms of accessible praxis, changing that ingrained superiority of the able and the unable, that's just got to go, like, from every brain. Like, and diversity of tactics, baby. Hit it linguistically, hit it tactically in your relationships, hit it, you know, philosophically in your mind as you postulate things. Where is my emotional desire to have dominion over somebody based on ability? Whether that's any kind of, they could be a billionaire, but I have the capacity to drop a rock on their head, right? Like, that's an ability, that is a power structure I have over them. And there's no moralizing around that. Just identifying that inherent knee-jerk desire to, and this is rampant in anarchist culture, to like, oh, I'm superior, right? And the first hinge of such a person is almost always because you're stupid or crazy. That's the first go-to of like the reactionary is ableist language. That's really where I've noticed the pattern. It's like, it's not just the ableist language kind of links a lot of bullshit. It's that it collects in certain points in conflict. And it's always the first point of conflict where people are just there to fight. That's the first fucking go-to again and again and again. And you just see derivatives of it repeat in creative ways, but it's the same knee-jerk, I'm better, you're less, you know? That's a hack thing in my head that I've seen.
Guys, I'm going to call it a night because it's like 1 o'clock here.
Man, thank you for soldiering.
No, it's been my pleasure.
It is a gift. Thank you so much.
Sorry really for talking endless garbage.
Oh man, it was beautiful garbage.
Beautiful garbage.
Swimming
Beautiful.
Which, you know, just to soothe any rumors going around about me. Yes, I appreciate garbage. That does not inherently mean that I am a gang of raccoons in a human suit. So
raccoons are fine, man. Raccoons are good.
You can just staunch that right now.
Okay, see you guys now, duh.
All right, much love, Greg. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So nice to see you.